It's Coach Tarek, the host of the Purpose-Driven Movement. My guest today is Dr. Sachin Patel. Sachin is a chiro and really an amazing advocate for everyone to really take ownership of their health. It's an amazing episode because he really focuses on the power of the breath. Why is the breath so important for us? How does it shape our face? How does it affect our physiology? And I really love his philosophies and really how he breaks down the application of breathing, the physiology, and how really anyone can do it within their own realm. This quote, which I love, is the doctor of the future is the patient. Don't miss this amazing episode with Dr. Sachin Patel. Check out the Functional Training Institute's latest offer, which is 15% off of any of our online training courses. Simply go to functionaltraininginstitute.com and input PDM15 at cart checkout. Welcome to the Purpose-Driven Movement, Sachin. It's so great to have you. And how are you doing?
I'm excellent. Thank you, Tarek. I appreciate this opportunity to connect with you, most importantly, and of course, your community. Thanks for having me.
That's much appreciated. And where are you dialing in from?
Right now, I'm in Mississauga, Ontario, which is just about half an hour west of Toronto, Canada.
Fair ways away from Thailand, where I am. It was really a pleasure meeting you last year in November at the Genius Network events, and I really hit it off with you and your messaging. And I thought, I want this guy on my podcast, and here we are. So it's really a privilege and a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now, we'd love to learn more about who you are, Sachin, your story, because everything's about story, and story allows us to connect the dots. And I feel that this is an important way to segue into the guts of what we're discussing, which is beyond breathing, and some other goodies, no doubt, that will emerge from that topic. So if you will, Sachin, if you could tell us about your story, what brought you into the realm of health and wellness and where you are today.
Sure. Well, thanks for asking. My story actually starts back in high school when I was certain that I wanted to be a computer engineer or programmer because it was something that came naturally to me, just the logical process and the ability to very quickly test your code to see if it worked. And if it didn't, you could make quick adjustments. So I kind of loved that. I also loved working with my hands. In high school, I won the shop award. So very good at working with materials and doing woodwork and really paying really close attention to detail. Those were some of my strong attributes growing up. And then I realized at the last minute that I didn't want to stare at a computer screen all day, which ironically is somewhat feels like what I do now, and program, because I couldn't turn it off. That was the crazy thing, is like once you think in code, everything becomes a computer code to you, and I couldn't turn it off. So I'd lay in bed at night coding in my head. I'm like, this can't be good for me. And so then a buddy of mine recommended chiropractic. And he said, why don't you look into chiropractic? And I said, what do I have to do to become a chiropractor? And he said, well, you have to have an undergraduate degree in science. And so I chose the field of kinesiology. And kinesiology is the physics and the study of human movement. And therefore, chiropractic became a natural extension of that. So I went to chiropractic college, started working with elite athletes and high performers and weekend warriors. And then in 2006, 2 years after I graduated, I was on the news and they did a story about elbow pain. We helped a lady, Connie, get out of significant and severe and chronic elbow pain that surgeons and other therapists can help. So they decided to air that on the news. And I remember that as a result of that news report airing, the phone just kept ringing and ringing and ringing, which at the time I thought was awesome until people started coming in with walkers and wheelchairs and, being propped up by a beloved family member. They just were not in very good health. And I was used to treating athletes, people who were injuring themselves because they were running too many marathons in a month, and elite athletes like football players and Olympians. So these are people who have a totally different subset of issues than people who are coming in with chronic illness. And so as a result of that, unfortunately, what ended up happening is I had to turn a lot of these people away because I didn't know how to help them. They were coming in with chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, autoimmune conditions, a variety of health challenges that I had no idea how to help. And I, more importantly, and most gut-wrenchingly, didn't know where to refer them to. So they had tried every medication, seen every specialist, tried all kinds of different modalities, and nothing was working for them. And these weren't problems I could, adjust away. These weren't soft tissue issues. These were cellular issues that were happening at a much deeper level than I could help them with. And then around the same time, as luck would have it, I started getting emails from who would later become my mentor, Dr. Ron Grisanti, about case studies of how he was helping people with these exact same problems. And he was showing the lab testing he was doing, the methodology and the approach that he was taking. And I said, you know what, this is pretty amazing. Let me take this training. So I became one of the first students to graduate from Functional Medicine University in 2006. And that led me down a path of essentially giving my existing chiropractic patients a functional medicine intake form. And I realized that the people who I thought I was helping were only utilizing my services in a very myopic way. They thought that I only could help them with their soft tissue injuries. And filling out this form, I realized that many of them were struggling with digestive issues, many of them struggling with mental health issues, adrenal fatigue, hormonal imbalances, things that they weren't necessarily bringing to my attention because they were coming in for something very specific. But obviously, if they're still dealing with these issues, nobody's helping them with them. So then I started my functional medicine, kind of training, but then also administration of the root cause approach that functional medicine takes to helping them. And as any practitioners may or may not know, functional medicine can get very complicated really fast. And so you kind of get to this level of peak complexity. And then you realize that I can either get more complicated or I can simplify. And that's when I decided to put the question out there, which is, how do I simplify my practice and eliminate 80% of the complexity, but get even better results? So that was like the question I asked myself. And then what I realized is that there was so much that we were leaving on the table because most clients weren't going to bed on time. Most clients have toxic lighting. Most clients don't have a way of regulating their nervous system. So they're dealing with a lot of, stress, or, some people have unresolved trauma that nobody's spoken to them about or that hasn't been addressed. So we started looking at their health from a totally different lens. There's so many things about somebody that you can't measure. There's so many aspects of somebody's health that doesn't show up on blood work, right? What time you went to bed doesn't show up on your blood work. How you're breathing right now doesn't show up on your blood work. If you love your job or your spouse or yourself, that doesn't show up on your blood work. If you're watching the sunrise or connecting with nature or connecting with source, do you have good social networks? None of that shows up on blood work, but those are the things that are actually most predictive when it comes to longevity. So this idea that we're going to be able to just measure our way towards health is somewhat limiting. I mean, it's valuable, but it's very limiting because the things that we know that increase lifespan are not the things that we can measure on blood work. So that became a fascination for me. And then I asked the question, well, if I'm going towards a path of simplicity, what is the simplest thing that people can do that has a sophisticated capacity to actually make a big difference? And I searched far and wide, and that's when I came across breath. And my breathwork journey started by attending a Wim Hof training. And by the end of that session, being able to hold my breath for 3.5 minutes, which I didn't think was possible for myself, certainly. And that really opened up a whole new world for me to explore. And then I started studying breath from a structural standpoint, from a biological standpoint, from a mitochondrial standpoint, and also from an emotional and spiritual standpoint. And I started realizing, wow, there's so much more here than we've been told. And as I started sharing the information with others, it piqued their interest and fascination that something that we do that we perhaps take for granted that's so simple can have such a profound effect on their health. So now I get to travel all over the world and share this information and get to work with people like yourself who are also fascinated with health optimization and teach them, some of the things that I've learned. None of what I'm going to share is new. I've perhaps connected some dots together to make the information more digestible. And there's certainly people that I continue to learn from. But I think that there's so much that can be said about something so simple, and it's so easy to apply. And it's something that, we're doing right now, whether we like it or not. And the question is, are we doing it consciously or are we doing it unconsciously? And if we can bring our breath into our conscious awareness throughout the day, which I'll give techniques on how to do that, then we can grab the steering wheel of our nervous system at any given time and, direct our physiology in whatever direction we want it to go to.
All right, Sachin. So thanks for sharing that amazing journey of yours. A lot of stuff that really resonates with what I do and who I am. And certainly the listeners always love to really listen in on perspectives and really with those perspectives sort of enrich their own journey. One thing that really struck out for me is the whole notion of like how perhaps we've become so obsessed about measuring everything, our physiology, and, we've got wearables this, wearable that. And you made a very good point that to a degree, yes, we can measure, and what we measure, we could perhaps manage, as the saying goes. But all of these other variables that may not show up on bloods, as you put it, how do you sort of marry those two things together? So the measuring in your own walk and also what you maybe teach others along their journey. So how do you bring those two things together? The measuring, the quantifiable elements versus the qualitative outcomes and things that you mentioned earlier, gazing into the sun and spending a moment to reflect or two, and all of these good things that perhaps don't show up in bloods, for example.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is having the client understand that. So when you're working with somebody, helping them understand what the limitations are of whatever modality you're using. So even lifestyle has limitations, right? There could be certain environmental factors that are impacting the client that we can only use lab testing to verify. However, what I would say is that the lifestyle and environment is 80%. That's the foundation upon which we want our clients to build their health. And the beauty of changing or upgrading really somebody's environment and lifestyle is that they model that to other family members. So if I just come home and I pop a magic pill and all my problems go away and I don't change my behavior, the problem is that my family isn't taking those pills and they're eventually going to end up with the same problems because it's our environment that ultimately, sets the stage for chronic dysfunction in our body and disease, if you will. So we try to help them understand how their environment plays a role in expressing their genes. That's called epigenetics. And we help them understand the limitations of lab work. And we also help them understand where lab work makes sense. So I still run labs on clients. I run functional stool testing, or I might run a hormone panel, or they can do an at-home blood spot test to identify foods that cause inflammation in their body. So we still utilize it. However, we don't just treat the labs and focus on the labs. We focus on the things that the labs aren't necessarily looking for. So we really dial in lifestyle and help them understand key factors that improve their health. One is circadian rhythm. So really optimizing our biology with the rising and setting of the sun plays a huge role in our hormones and cortisol production and rejuvenation. We also help them understand the importance of rest and recovery. And one of the tools that we use in order to do that is something called an Aura Ring. And the Aura Ring gives us a daily short feedback loop. So it can tell us, is this person getting adequate amounts of sleep? Are they going to bed at the right time? Are they waking up at the right time? Are they tossing and turning while they sleep? Because recovery is so huge. We used to sleep 3 more hours on average than we do today. So our ancestors, before the light bulb was invented, used to sleep about 10 hours a night. And now we sleep 7 if we're lucky. And because of our light environment and our disconnection from nature, most people's sleep is very disrupted. And so sleep is another big factor that comes into one's health. And the third thing that is super important, and again, in no particular order, is the breath. We take about 23,000 breaths a day. We consume 30 pounds of air each and every single day, which is more than the amount of food that we eat in a week. And our immune system actually starts in our nose. That's our initial defense against the outside world. So many times people take our breath for granted, like I did for many years, not realizing how valuable of a tool it is. Our breath assists our heart in pumping blood as our diaphragm moves up and down and as our lungs expand and contract. Our diaphragm also, as it moves up and down, regulates the flow of our lymphatic system, which is our sewage system in our body. So our breath helps us move lymph. And our breath also helps us through the diaphragm, really, in distributing forces through the myofascial matrix. And this is why many of our emotions and trauma are stored in the diaphragm, and our grief is stored in our lungs. So once you start kind of connecting all these dots and you start realizing, wow, breath is really, in my opinion, the zenith of simplicity and sophistication, because there's so many different breathing techniques that you can do to create predictable biological effects in the body that are reliable, so if I wanted to reliably lower somebody's blood pressure, I could do that with the breath. If I wanted to raise it, I could do that with the breath. If I wanted to cool somebody down or heat them up, I could do that. If I want to increase blood flow to the digestive system and trunk organs or to the arms and legs, I could do that as well, simply by using my breath. And the breath is a two-way street between the brain and the rest of the body, because we consciously control it through the brainstem. It's a two-way street where we can elicit specific states in our body through our breath. And it's also important to note that the nervous system uses the breath to also create an altered state. So for example, if somebody were to feel a sense of relief, they would sigh, right? They would audibly sigh and go, that was painful, but I'm glad I'm through it, right? Is what they might say to themselves. And guess what? We can actively do that to create that feeling in our bodies as well. So there's so much I could say about that, but I'll leave it at that for now, and we can unpack it a little bit more. But breath has really been one of the most powerful things that we can do that immediately improves all areas of our life.
I couldn't agree with you more on that, Sachin. I've studied under Patrick McKeown, Oxygen Advantage, and another chap on the island who he's a Swedish guy named Andy, and he's got Breath Warrior. That's his whole thing, ice baths, Breath Warrior. I think like you, he has been inspired by Wim Hof and others, and he does breath work classes here on the island, and I've trained with him. And it's just been marvelous because being able to learn from him firsthand, and I've been able to include in the morning, in the evening, different modes of breathing, as you said, to change physiology, psychology, and really for me, for example, in the evening, it's getting into a almost spiritual state, I believe, because it allows me to, get into that those brain waves that allow me to relax and get into a deep sleep eventually. So yeah, I'm a big advocate of that, and I think I can never get enough of this messaging through the podcasting through my guests, because there's always slightly different perspectives, as I mentioned earlier, and the breath is really one of those that have profoundly changed my life over the years. And it sounds like it's a tool that you use quite a lot, and it's a simplistic one. You can use it with apps to guide in metronome breathing, but it can be done anywhere, anytime, any place, as you said, to lower cortisol or stress in the state of panic. So yeah, all of those things. I could keep going on. One thing that you did say that's really stark is that grief is stored in lungs, for example. And can you elaborate a little bit more on the emotions being stored in the body's organs, for example? And that one in particular has stood out for me.
Yeah, I hear that often when I mention that, there's different emotions that are stored in different organs in our body. And this is based on the Chinese medicine system. So anger, for example, is in our liver, and grief is in our lungs, as another example. Now, what's really fascinating, and I don't have any science to back this up, so it's a theory for now. I don't know if they'll ever do a study on something like this, but it makes sense when I'll share it. So as a child, or even as an adult, there's probably been times where we've held back our emotions. And one of the things that we do when we express our emotions is we cry, right? And so many of us, I'm sure, have been told at some point in our lives to stop crying. When we tell someone to stop crying, they have to stop breathing. And now that diaphragm that really wants to contract is unable to do so because we're consciously trying to hold it still. And so then it develops trigger points, and it eventually starts creating short, shallow breathing patterns. And then these short, shallow breathing patterns create a chronic low-grade sympathetic breathing pattern, which puts people in a perpetual state of fight or flight. So, just like in a car, if the alignment is off just a little bit and you let go of the wheel, over the course of 50 feet, it's not a big deal and you can recover pretty quickly. But over the course of 5 miles, even a slight little bit of alignment that's off you're going to be way off track. And so for the average person who's breathing dysfunctionally, it might be very subtle to the untrained eye, and it might just be the way they're used to breathing. But over the course of 23,000 breaths, day after day after day, it's going to create a more sympathetic dominant state for that person. And it just makes it much harder for them to heal and repair and regenerate when they're in that state. So, more research probably needs to be done around that theory, but I do know that when I work with people and do breath work, there is a lot of release that takes place, and we find that it's coming from the diaphragm as they're going through the breath work experience. And we also have found that when we have people do trigger point work on their diaphragm, just with the tips of their fingers, many of them have emotional releases because these are things that they've been holding on to for quite some time. Now, the other thing that's interesting about our diaphragm is that some of your listeners might be familiar with the myofascial system, I'm sure. And the myofascial system is a force distribution system. and an emotional distribution system. So what ends up happening is when we experience any trauma, whether it's physical or emotional, it gets stored in our myofascial tissue. And the central, regulator of the pressure of the myofascial system is actually our diaphragm. So our diaphragm and our breath are very closely connected to how we unpack emotions, how we store emotions in our body, and then eventually how we release them as well.
Yeah, so fascinating stuff there. We'll keep diving in deeper and deeper and get into some incredible depths here. One thing I wanted to discuss is the heart rate variability, the importance of that, and how the breath regulates that. And you talked about the channel between the brain, for example, and other organs. Can you say much about the channel between the brain and the heart, and heart rate variability playing a part in that flow, if you like, of energy?
Yeah, absolutely. So heart rate variability, for those listeners that may not be familiar with it, is basically the variation between each individual heartbeat. And so somebody's average beats per minute might be, let's call it 60, but each individual beat, there's slight variation between it. The greater the variation, the more that person is in a parasympathetic state, or a rest, recovery, rejuvenation, reproduction type of state. That's the state that we want to be in order for healing to take place. When we're in the opposite, which is more of a fight or flight type of state, then our HRV our heart rate will go up, and our HRV, as a general rule of thumb, will come down because there's less variability between each beat. Now, HRV helps us, and heart rate together, help us measure how well somebody recovers from their day-to-day stressors. And the way I look at stress is like a little glass of water. And imagine you have, a glass of water that you can put 8 ounces into. And that's the normal, comfortable amount of water that goes in the cup. And then, of course, you can add a little bit more and get it filled all the way to the top. But then you have to be really careful how you handle it. And it's a little bit uncomfortable to drink water that way. But let's just say you have an 8-ounce cup. Recovery is like taking water out of the cup. As much as we possibly can, we want that cup to be as empty as possible so we have maximum resilience. We can tolerate 8 to 10 ounces of stress that day. But if you don't recover and you only empty 4 ounces out of the cup every day, and let's say you fill it up to 8 every day, then you only have a reserve of about 4 to 6 ounces of stress that you can tolerate. And then the next day, you're taking out a little bit and then filling it up. And then each and every single day that happens. And the days the cup overflows are bad days, so to speak, right? We're not as resilient. We're not as focused. We're not as energized. And so HRV and heart rate can both be very cool tools at determining how well somebody recovers. Now, the way we can, kind of work on our HRV and put our nervous system into a more calm and regenerative state is by using the breath. And, breathing techniques that prolong the exhale will shift us into a more parasympathetic state. And simply slowing down our breathing will also put us in a more parasympathetic state. So James Nestor talks about something called coherence breathing. And the HeartMath Institute also talks about coherence breathing. And this is breathing in at a pace of anywhere from 4 to 6 seconds and breathing out at a pace of 4 to 6 seconds. Now, that ultimate pattern might be unique for each of us. There might be slight variation there. And you can use something called a HeartMath device like Inner Balance or the EM Wave to determine what puts you in a maximum state of coherence. So there are tools that you can use if you want to get really granular to identify what breathing pattern is most optimized for you. Because of course, just like with most things, there is slight variation between each individual. But in general, anywhere from 4 to 6 seconds in and out, in through the nose, out through the nose, is going to put us in a state of coherence that's going to allow us to be in a more calm, centered, and focused state for any activity that comes our way. And then, from there, once you get into a state of coherence, that's when your heart and your brain are in communication and in coherence with one another. That's where that term comes from, is coherence. They're both in a coherence resonant frequency. And that really brings out the best in us, right? I think, we want to be heart-centered, but we also want to have our faculties in place as well. And when you're in that space, you're able to make really good decisions. You're really able to be really present for other people. You're able to hold space for individuals. You unlock a whole different level of creativity, But at the same time, you're also in a healing and regenerative state. So your body is repairing as well.
Yeah, it's terrific. I was alluding when I mentioned that to the Heart Math Institute. So I did some of their courses and had been using that device for some time, and it's quite, almost when you're using it, because I imagine you have, it's just like boing, and you're like, what's that? When you're not in coherence. And but yeah, so those listeners out there, Heart Math Institute, terrific organization, and they talk a lot about the heart rate variability, and they do have a great little device that does measure that coherence, tracks and so forth. And I believe it's between 5 and 6 breaths per minute that is optimal, or somewhere between those two in any case. So for those listeners out there, there are many strategies, and I think that's a very, very good one, Sachin, just for folk to kind of get into a state of coherence, regulate the heart rate variability. And also, like you mentioned earlier, is that slower exhale and practicing that. Yeah, it's interesting how far sort of breath training and interest has come in the last few years, and it seems to never stop, which I think is a good thing. But what would you say about sort of sifting through the different thought leaders, if you will, ideas and concepts? What is best for one just to get kind of grounded in really good knowledge around breathing that actually is applicable? Because you come across someone who's very pragmatic, I imagine. You don't just treat your patients, clients, in the clinic. I imagine you're empowering them with habits and best practices. So anything that you can say to the audience, the listeners too, about that, because there's so much information out there now. How do they just sift through what is just true to what maybe is just waffling or, so forth?
Yeah, a great question. So, breath is interesting because it can be used. I mean, we use it day to day, right? All day, every day. And then it has like specific applications. So you can use breath to get into altered states of consciousness, which it sounds like you've experienced as well, and have profound spiritual experiences. You can also use breath to enhance your exercise, right? So if you're exercising, lifting weights, for example, you want to breathe a certain way. If you're going for a sprint, you want to breathe a certain way. Breath is more than just oxygenating our tissues. It physically also supports our body as well. Again, through the myofascial matrix, through the expansion and contraction of the lungs, assisting the heart, and then also in moving lymph. So our breath does a variety of different things for us. Tariq, as I try to focus on not so much breath work, while I facilitate breath work and I love it and I think it's an amazing experience, what I think a lot of people are missing is how to breathe when they're not doing breath work. Because our breath work practice might be 10 minutes, it might be an hour a day if we have the time and resources for that. However, most people may not, and therefore they might think that, well, I don't have a breath work practice. However, you're breathing throughout the day and you're breathing all night. So what if we could turn every moment into a breathwork practice? Just like when you're driving, you can drive unconsciously and get from point A to point B and not even realize how you got there. Or you can grab the steering wheel with 2 hands and be really present to the road and drive, very carefully, but and be very aware of how you're driving and be very present to how you're driving. So our breath is the same way. It's like literally grabbing the steering wheel of our nervous system and then deciding how we want to feel. And every breath is essentially, I view it as a fork in the road to decide how I want to feel next. So if I wanted to go for a jog or a run, well, I want to assist my body in doing that. So I'm going to alter my breath in accordance to that. If I want to meditate, I'm going to alter my breath in accordance to that. So we actually created a simple guide. It's called Breathe Like This, Not That. And it teaches you how to breathe in different scenarios. So if you're going for a walk, here's how you breathe. If you're trying to fall asleep, here's how you breathe. If you're trying to do focused work, here's how you can breathe. So we can really use our breath to assist us in whatever task we're trying to accomplish. The other thing that I feel like gets overlooked is, and it's related to breathing, is tongue positioning. So the position of our tongue actually also soothes our nervous system. There's what I call a magic button at the roof of our mouth. And that magic button children use to soothe themselves is why they suck on their thumb or why they suck on a pacifier, because it actually pushes that magic button, as with their mother's nipple if they're breastfeeding. So they're instantly soothed. And this applies for adults as well. We don't outgrow these things. And so placing our tongue at the roof of our mouth and then gently laying it across the roof will allow us to feel instantly relaxed. And so that's the normal resting position of where our tongue should be. When our tongue is in that position, a few other things happen. One is that it acts as a spacer. So if you have young children, if you're listening to this, If your children's tongue is at the bottom of their mouth instead of sitting at the roof of their mouth, they will develop a much more narrow airway because the tongue actually acts as a spacer, and it's the only thing that's pushing the face outwards and the teeth forward. So when people's tongues aren't positioned correctly, it results in a small, narrow airway because the roof of our mouth is the bottom of our sinuses and our airway. And it also results in children who may have chronic anxiety or just generalized anxiety because they're breathing through their mouth as opposed to breathing through their nose. And the other thing that happens is there's overcrowding that takes place. And this overcrowding then may lead to, expensive dental appliances if they need expansion, or it could even lead to other issues such as having to pull teeth. And when you have your children's teeth pulled, it doesn't actually fix the problem. It actually creates a more narrow airway. So then they become even more likely to become habitual mouth breathers, which then leads to, chronic low-grade stress state. So I try to get people to focus on how they're breathing throughout the day, where they're placing their tongue. Are they breathing through their mouth or breathing through their nose? And ideally, we want people breathing through their nose 90% of the time. And this will put their nervous system in a calm, restful state. And we particularly want people breathing through their nose while they're sleeping, because one of the things that's is significant about sleep, it's our most restorative activity. So it's our most regenerative activity that we do, or it's passive, of course. And many people sleep with their mouth open. And when we sleep with our mouth open, a few things happen. One, it decreases nitric oxide, which increases blood pressure. It increases cortisol output. So people may even wake up and have high blood sugar levels, even though they didn't eat anything while they were sleeping because of the way they were breathing. It also dries out the mouth, making people more prone to cavities. It acts as a diuretic. So somebody's more likely to have to wake up and use the bathroom in the middle of the night if they are mouth breathing versus nasal breathing. And what we noticed is when we have people just put a small piece of tape just over their lips like this, vertically, they don't have to seal their mouth. They start dreaming again. They wake up more refreshed. For men, they notice that they start having morning erections again because they're increasing their nitric oxide production, which increases circulation. And many people will eliminate their brain fog and energy issues when they wake up in the morning because of something as simple as a 2-cent piece of tape. And what's fascinating is that if it was 10 years ago, you could only imagine if somebody complained, I wake up tired, I have brain fog, I feel exhausted all day. You can only imagine how many supplements and how many lab tests that person would have run, and how many of them would come back normal, and then how many supplements that they'd be taking or herbs that they'd be taking to try to resolve that. And now when people come to us, within a couple of days, these issues start to completely disappear and their energy is restored because they're breathing the way they're supposed to and oxygenating their tissues and also detoxing, right? 70% of detoxification happens in the lungs, and 84% of weight loss happens through the lungs. So our lungs play a crucial role in so many things, metabolic, but also emotional, and also helping us get through our day-to-day activities.
Fascinating. Yeah, you've rattled off so much good stuff there, Sachin. And I think the other thing is the bacteria, right? That sort of gets in through the mouth, whereas through the nasals, it, as you said earlier, dehumidifies the air and is a barrier for bacteria and all those bad things to can.
Yeah, your nose is actually lined with a mucous membrane that, with the correct oral microbiome, produces something called nitric oxide. And nitric oxide essentially acts as a antiviral, antibacterial, antipathogenic agent. So it kills these things on contact, and that's why it's lined in our nasal cavity, because that's where our immune defenses start, is in our nasal cavity. And breathing through our nose humidifies the air. So moisture regulates the air, temperature regulates the air, and pressure regulates the air. So by breathing through our nose, it's always going to feel a little bit harder to breathe through your nose, even if you have well-developed sinuses, because the nose is designed to pressurize the air. So the purpose of the nose is to slow the air down, to disinfect it, to pressurize it, temperature regulate it, moisture regulate it, and perfect it before it goes into the lungs. But when we breathe through our mouth is the dirtiest part of our body. If you ask any microbiologist, they'll tell you that. And our mouth doesn't pressurize the air, and it doesn't temperature regulate the air or moisture regulate the air. So we're sending the worst quality air into our lungs, and our lungs also have a microbiome. So we're creating a chronic stressor on our immune system by breathing through our mouth versus breathing through our nose.
Very disruptive, yeah, as you pointed out. So the tape is here, so it's not across. We're not fully sealing the mouth. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's not necessary to do that. The goal is simply keep your jaw in a closed and relaxed position. And, many people have a hard time with just completely sealing their mouth off. It makes them claustrophobic or really nervous. And it's really not necessary. So we just can keep our mouth in that closed position by putting a piece of tape vertically, which allows us to still breathe through our mouth if we want to. And it also allows us to talk if we need to. And, it seems to be less burdensome for people to do that.
And then the tongue on the roof of the palate, yeah. And you made a very good point. It's moment by moment, being really aware of the breath throughout the day, which is something that I've learned over the years because there were dysfunctionalities certainly in my breathing, and I've learned to relax the tongue on the roof of the palate. But to be able to then teach that and profoundly impacts one's physiology and psychology, and really all of the health spokes in their entire life is pretty profound. I mean, this is profound. It's accessible to many practitioners out there, and even to those who are enthusiastic and willing to kind of own things and change the circumstances of their own health and wellness. And I really can't stress that any more than what you've discussed to this point. But we need people like you, Sachin, as well, because you're a conduit for shifting habits and for profound change. And one of the things that struck out for me when I was reading through your bio is you mentioned that the doctor of the future is the patient, which I looked at that and I keep reading. I think, wow, it's as simple as it is, it's profound. What sort of has driven you as maybe that being part of your vision and mission, and how you treat what you do? Can you expand on that and perhaps inspire as well at the same time?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for asking. So, one of the things that I realized going through chiropractic school, our core philosophy in chiropractic school is that all of us are gifted with something called innate intelligence, which is the intelligence that runs and created the entire cosmos. Now, some people might call that God, some people might call it innate intelligence. Whatever that is to you, tap into that, because that's what's creating this beautiful cosmic dance that we all get to experience. And so our philosophy as chiropractors is that the body is perfect. We just have to get out of the way. And so there's so many things that we do that get in the way of our body performing and functioning at its best. And then when people go to the doctor blames the body, the very thing that built itself out of two cells that is constantly dying and being reborn in every single moment, right? So you're literally a hologram of cells dying and being reborn every passing second. And you have the intelligence of the entire universe inside your body at any given moment, right? We are the highest, as far as we've discovered so far, the most intelligent creature in the entire cosmos. And if we were to find even a single cell from anyone's body on any other planet, it would be the greatest discovery of mankind. But most people have never discovered themselves, and they've never been given an instruction manual on how their body works. And so our philosophy is the doctor of the future is really the patient. It comes from this idea that, really this philosophy and the truth, which is that we have all this beautiful innate wisdom and intelligence wrapped up inside of us. If somebody could teach us how to use it, then we stand a much better chance. And the way I look at it is like the way the current healthcare system is right now is you have to get sick first before you get healthy. But you don't get sick overnight. It happens over the course of a lifetime of unconscious choices, a lifetime of, sometimes unconscious circumstances. Sometimes we experience traumatic things that have happened to us that we haven't processed. And if we don't process these things and release them, they stay retained within our body's ecosystem, so to speak, in our fascia and in our mind and, kind of in our environment in many ways. And that creates disease and dysfunction. So our goal is to help people be empowered from the very beginning, right? So instead of having a disease prevention strategy, our focus is health creation. And the simple thing I can share with you is, if you wanted to go to a restaurant you've never been to before, you're not going to put into your GPS all the places you don't want to go, hoping you get there. You're going to put in exactly where you want to go. And so many people focus on what they don't want. They don't want cancer, they don't want heart disease, they don't want diabetes. However, they don't really know what they actually want. So when they focus on health creation, then every day there's opportunity and possibility for them to move their health in the right direction. And so by giving them that operating system and that formula, we bio-individualize it using DNA testing, using obviously consultative services, and then, lab work where appropriate. And then, of course, with their Aura Ring, we're able to kind of map things out to measure their progress. We're able to give them a individualized blueprint for health creation for themselves. Now, 80% of what all of us should be doing is the same. And I would say 20% of it is nuanced, right? What diet is most appropriate for you? We actually have a genetic test that we do that can identify, is it paleo? Is it carnivore? Is it vegetarian, based on how you metabolize fats and carbohydrates and all those other elements. We can also identify what type of exercise is best for you. Is it cardio? Is it lifting weights? Is it high intensity interval training, right? What works for me may not work for the next person. So we really have to identify where an individual is going to get the biggest ROI. So it eliminates a lot of the guesswork for them to have to go through. And in doing so, we get amazing results. We give the body more of what it needs. We empower the client and show them literally dozens, if not over 100 opportunities each day to become healthier, because health isn't just about diet and exercise, right? Those are two components. Those are two spokes in the wheel, but they're not the only spokes. How we breathe matters. The materials that we wear on our body, that matters. The lighting that we use in our home, that matters. How we protect ourselves, like that's why I'm wearing these glasses, to protect myself from non-native wavelengths of light. Going outside, like really simple things that people can do, resets their body. And in a very short period of time, they see dramatic shifts in their health. It's not uncommon for somebody to go through our 10-week program and lose anywhere from 20 to up to 66 pounds. We've had a client lose 66 pounds in 10 weeks by simply giving his body more of what it needs and less of the things that interfere with its optimal function. And when you kind of understand the magnitude of the problem, the solution isn't more doctors. The solution isn't waiting for more people to get sick and then giving them natural holistic healthcare, right? The real solution, what we want for ourselves and our family members and people that we love, and even people we don't love or even know, is we want people to experience good health always. And if we could do that from the very beginning, imagine the world that we could create in just one generation of teaching people how to be healthy from the very moment they're born. They don't have to wait until they're 40 to learn what to eat or learn how to exercise or learn that, man, for 40 years, I've been doing this completely unconsciously and I had no awareness that I was doing this to my body. Imagine that world. And that's the world I want to create. My son is patient zero, so to speak. So he's a product of our environment and in our understanding and awareness. And, he doesn't even have a pediatrician. He's 14 years old. He's only missed like 2 days of school in his life. He's traveled the world. He's a beautiful, amazing artist and just a wonderful, wonderful, amazing son. I'm so proud of him. And he's like our little science experiment, so to speak, of what's possible, So it's possible for us to have amazing health. I actually don't, embarrassingly enough, have a family doctor here. I see, different specialists or different advisors for different areas, and I learn a lot of things, but I've only missed 1 day of work in my entire career. So almost 20 years, I've only missed 1 day of work because I had the sniffles. I wasn't even really sick, but I didn't want to, working as a chiropractor, you don't want to be sniffling all around people. So that was my only day of work that I missed in my entire career. And again, it's possible for anyone to achieve that when we know what to do and what not to do.
That was a so profound session, anchored in wonderful humility too. And I think, dare I say, with your son, it's great values and upbringing in addition to those things, because I know you as a great human being as well. And I do have that red light in my room. So now I don't have the red light here in the office, but before I head to bed, normally I'm in bed by about 9 p.m. for me and my partner. That's a good time. We put the red light on and she loves it, and we can meditate together and all of those things. So get either Sachin's red light or just get a bowl from somewhere because it doesn't cost much. I was able to bring it all across from the States to Thailand. So it's incredible wisdom there. And health creation, I really love that. Really focusing on what we can control, the positive elements. Here where I am in Thailand, we get a lot of sun. So I get sort of micro doses throughout the day. I'll take the shirt off. put the shirt back on when I've got a meeting, what have you. So, really for me, it's just these habits, like you said before, it starts with us and being mindful of the breath or getting off the chair, getting some fresh air, getting some sunlight. I tend to do my exercise. I break it up into 2 or 3 times throughout the day. My morning is yoga, for example, stretching and breath work. And then it's some loaded work or some skill work. And, I think you're right. It could be achieved if someone can, whatever environment they have, really get into a bit of a rhythm, start to shift their habits, and then find that community. I think that finding that community is also helpful. I mean, there's another whole certainly episode, and I'm certainly not underestimating or saying these things are easy, because habits are often hard to break and we need to form new ones. But it can be as simple as one little thing at a time can eventually be the credit for us in the future. Just prior to us wrapping up, Sachin, there's so much more to talk about, and I really, really enjoy this conversation with you, is if there's one thing that you could change about the health, wellness, fitness industry or sector, what would that be? What would that magic wand be for that one thing?
Ooh, wow, that's a good one. I think the thing that I would focus on the most is getting people's nervous systems regulated. So does the exercise they do or the activity that they partake in and the recovery that they go through serve and honor their nervous system? And I'm not just saying that as a chiropractor. I'm saying that as a functional medicine practitioner, as a breathwork facilitator and coach, and even as a parent and a husband. Because when our nervous system is regulated, it brings out the best in us. And when our nervous system is dysregulated, then, we don't really get the ROI from the effort that we're putting in. And an example I can give you is somebody who's really working hard in the gym, but the rest of their day is fight or flight, stress. And then they maybe have, a stressful relationship at home or stressful circumstances at home. So their nervous system is just, running sympathetic dominant the whole time. And so that person might need a different type of exercise or modality to help them regulate their nervous system. So maybe they need to focus more on breathing and breath work than they do with high intensity type of exercises or boot camps. So really paying attention to the state of one's nervous system and then identifying what is the most appropriate intervention for this person. And a really simple example I can give you, I had a client of mine who would run every morning. And she had worked with us before, and she was no longer an active client. And, we're Facebook friends. So I was, following her journey of running every morning. And I didn't say anything. I kept my mouth shut because I picked up on a few trends. But I said, let let her do her thing. And so she would wear a hat every morning with sunglasses and AirPods, playing loud music in her ears. And a month later, she hadn't lost any weight. In fact, I think she had gained some weight, despite the fact that she was going for a morning run. And she felt great. I mean, everyone feels good after exercising for the most part, but she wasn't getting an ROI. And I said, well, may I make a suggestion? And she said, yes. I said, let's take off the hat. Let's take off the glasses. Let's let the sun in the eyes. Let's expose as much of your skin as you can. And it's summertime now, so you can, wear something sleeveless so you get more sunlight exposure. Now let's take off the AirPods, throw them in the garbage. And then let's have you listen to the sounds of nature and go for a walk in nature, and let's see what happens. And in a short period of time, the weight started melting off. Her nervous system felt so much more calm and relaxed. She didn't have to work up this huge sweat in the morning to try to get the results she was looking for. So it was actually the result that she wanted required way less effort than she thought. She just had to know how to work with her body instead of seemingly working against her body. So getting her nervous system regulated was actually one of the most valuable little tips that I gave her, and it flipped the switch and her health started moving in the right direction. So that's why I say that.
That's profound. Yeah. It's a joyful tear I have, honestly. It's the things like that it's awareness, and you obviously built the trust with that client. You followed the journey. You didn't judge straight away. I think that's a bit of a lesson there for coaches, practitioners. Don't judge and assume. You let it ride, and then you had that opportunity where she was able to listen, and it was just there. It's just, you got out of the way, and then you went and in that right moment gave that advice. So that's something for the listeners, those of you who are coaches and practitioners, do not judge lest you be judged with the measure that you judge. So yeah, it's easier said than done. These things, however, really being mindful. And that was one thing that I've learned about you and our time together is just how mindful you are. Even when you're eating, you're very considerate. And I really love those qualities about you, Sachin. So thank you for your kindness, your wisdom, your humility, and your humanity coming on this podcast. It's been just a pleasure.
Thank you, my friend. What a total honor and what a blessing that we got to sit next to each other and get to know each other. And I'm looking forward to seeing you again in person.
Yeah, for sure. And for those of you who want to grab the show notes, you can follow Sachin. What would be the quickest way that they could find you, Sachin? Social media or some other way?
Yeah, Facebook is probably where I spend most of my time on social media. And that's a great place. Instagram as well. So it's Sachin Patel DC on Facebook and the Sachin Patel on Instagram. And I also created a resource, if I may share, related to breathing. If you go to breathworkwithsachin.com, so www.breathworkwithsachin.com, created a whole bunch of free resources and tools, all centered around breathing. It's my passion project, so you can opt in and you'll get a series of fully guided video and audio tracks taking you through a whole 75-minute process. You'll also get Breathe Like This, Not That. I have a stop snoring guide to show you simple exercises and ways that you can stop snoring at night if that's something that affects you or your partner. And there's some keynotes in there as well. And I'm more than happy to share my slides for those that request it.
Oh, beautiful. And I really appreciate that. If we could have that in the show notes, I think you've shared that in your bio. That's terrific. So that's very kind of you. We'll just make sure that the word is spread and people can follow you, which I really encourage those listeners to check out what you do. We'll hopefully get you on again down the track. But for now, Sachin, all the best, and we'll see you down the track.
Well, thank you, my friend. Great seeing you again. And here's to an amazing year ahead.
If you haven't already, we would be honored if you would consider subscribing and following us on your favorite platform. That way, you'll never miss an episode and you'll be the first to know when new episodes are released. We truly appreciate your support and we can't wait to continue to grow and connect with you